very grateful to be invited to add in what we do at Plant Heritage with the National Plant Collections in Britain and Ireland. So I'm Lucy Pitman. My job title is Plant Conservation Officer. I'm one of two at Plant Heritage among the conservation team. My remit is specifically for the National Plant Collections. The collections coordinators, we have regional coordinators of about 40 volunteers around Britain and Ireland. And that's my main role in the organisation. So I'd just like to give you a bit of background to Plant Heritage as it stands today. So the National Plant Collections had an unexpected start. It all evolved from a meeting through the IUCN, which was founded in 1947. And in the 1970s, conservationists were becoming increasingly concerned about pressures on wild habitats, loss of plant species in the wild. There was also recognition that the situation was actually not much better for cultivated plants. So even, at this point, people were recognizing that plants were cultivated plants that have been used in gardens and in floristry and things like that were disappearing. And a significant part of our horticultural heritage across Europe was going to vanish forever. So a conference was held at Kew in 1975 and 76. The relevant meeting in this context was looking at the functions of living plant collections in conservation and conservation-orientated research and public education. So in 1978, on the back of that meeting, various members who had attended that from Kew and the RHS, Royal Horticultural Society here, and others, convened a new conference under the Royal Horticultural Society to bring together the organisations in Britain interested in the conservation and preservation of cultivated plants, and to consider the practical role of gardens in the conservation of rare and threatened plants. And there were over 100 representatives at this meeting from across the horticulture industry. And this became initially an idea for the founding of Gardens and Plants Council. This would have been a national body, a national organisation, functioning close to that of the Arts Council, which does still exist. However, it felt that it wasn't going to quite fit what the remit of this organisation should be. So what had been an idea for a new Arts Council became the National Council for the Conservation of Plants and Gardens. And in the first 5 years, Gardens and Plants Steering Committee was set up, charitable status was established, and funding found. A membership scheme was also set up with 35 groups, regional groups across the UK, 29 of which are still running today. And the council itself was set up with representatives from these groups. So, and the first employee, horticultural taxonomist, was taken on in 1980. Of the original collections accredited, so these first collections through the pilot scheme, the first collections were accredited between 1981 and 1982. By 1982, there were 57 nationally accredited plant collections across Britain and Ireland. And today, November 2022, we have 696 accredited national plant collections across approximately 400 locations. Some of these original sites still have still hold national collection, in fact, and these include organisations like the National Trust for Scotland, the National Trust that Alison works for, the Hillier Arboretum, RHS Gardens at Wisley and at Rosemore. Paynton Zoo, zoological societies actually came quite high on the list in the early days and still do in some cases. Hergus Croft, Western Burt Arboretum, and the Cambridge Botanic Gardens. So let's move on. The long name, the National Council for the Conservation of Plants and Gardens, was not a useful working title. So the title of Plant Heritage was taken on as a working title for the organisation in 2009. In 2018, the organisation was entirely rebranded as Plant Heritage, which became the official name of the charity. I'll just very quickly, the background to how collections are run. All national plant collections are accredited. They go through a process of application that comes before a plant collections committee. This is and always has been actually an independent committee responsible for the accreditations, made up of professional horticulturalists, botanists, taxonomists, nurserymen, collection holders, gardeners from many of the original horticulturalist organisations and people from industry that established the organisation at the beginning. In 2013, the system changed slightly, and 3 collection categories were implemented to focus on the scope or how collections could be set up. And in 2015, approximately, we established our own plant records database specifically for and designed for national plant collections. All collections have to meet specific curation standards, but they can now include smaller groups within a genus, and not all collections have to be hundreds of plants. So holding a national plant collection or being collection holders has become a far more achievable aim for 2021. So the collection categories that sit within the national plant collections, reference, which are much closer to the original older collections. These tend to be the biggest and most generically complete of plants in UK and Ireland. Historical collections, which I'll come back to, and horticultural collections, which historic and horticultural sit often side by side. Some could be in both categories. We tend to ask them to choose one. So there we are, and the Passiflora is an example of a reference. The irises of John D. Taylor, a much smaller collection, but very specialist is under historical. And Monada, wonderful collection down in the west of Wales. So we've heard the phrase living library before. The national plant collections in here have been described as living libraries. When to describe what they are, people know what zoos are. Animals are kept in zoos to protect them, to breed from, to return to the wild where there's threat to habitats and things. And these plant collections tend to be the same. There's a lot of what's called plant blindness that goes on, which I'm sure many of you have heard about. So just as an example of how these collections operate, really, relatively new collections of Dryopteris and Polystichum cultivars were re-established in an amazing ravine, so a rocky garden down in Devon. The historic ferns had disappeared over time, so an existing collection holder with an extraordinarily large collection of ferns helped the McCallantane to set up these 2 collections. There's still the Ahrens cultivar collection, bred by George Ahrens. Georg, at Wisley, was helped to come to life from another collection holder in Devon, long-established collection. Malcolm Ferro, who set up that collection about 40 years ago, has personal collections to that Ahrens family in Germany. So his research helped to set up this collection at Wisley. And then other collections like the wonderful Gallica roses at Carrollside, which is up in the Scottish borders. The garden already existed and the collection of roses already existed. So Rose Foyle, who owns it, was encouraged to register her amazing collection as a national collection under the scheme. We come to historic collections. These are incredibly varied, some large, some small, and most of them, well, all of them, relate to a personal interest of somebody involved with the collections. The Crocus collection at Middleton House near London includes plants raised by E.A. Bowles. Then we have Sir Michael Foster introductions. Lucy Skellorn's collection was established when the family discovered that her great-grandfather was Sir Michael Foster, the extraordinary iris breeder. So she decided to do some research, which eventually evolved into her establishing a national collection. Same with the backhouse cultivars up in Scotland at the Rossi estate. Caroline Thompson, who lives there, her family is the backhouse family, and she started doing research into her family, which took off and became a huge collection. And the research carries on. They found diaries recently from one James Backhouse, which he's now working with. The tulip collection, historic tulips. This is a new collection again of the florists and breeders tulips that were part of the tulip mania in the 16th century, which Lenneke alluded to earlier. But seeing these wonderful, wonderful images that look like Rembrandt paintings, fabulous collection. And then Ellen Wilmot, extraordinary gardener and horticulturalist from history. Nick Stanley was working on a different collection as a group collection, and he became fascinated by Ellen Wilmot's life and history. So he set up a collection of plants named for and associated with Ellen Wilmot. And over on the side, the amazing Bloody Ploughman, fabulous name for an apple. It was first found at Megginch Castle up in Scotland near Perth. And the lady who currently owns is incumbent at Megginch Castle, decided to look further into the heritage of the fruit from their gardens and established a Scottish heritage apple and pear collection up there. It's wonderful to visit, actually. So, how many collections are there? I've just pulled out a small example of the numbers of collections for different genera. And when it comes to looking for plants for historic gardens, they're an amazing number to start with, and they're fascinating and wonderful people that work with them. The national collections come and go. People retire as national collection holders. The collections are then withdrawn or passed on. So these are just some examples of collections currently in the scheme. As you can see, the roses from 19th century shrub roses, alba roses, the gallicas we saw earlier that are up in Scotland, right down to Spinacissima roses, the Scots roses and hybrids. The narcissus, mostly historic collections, as you can see. And the Primula auricula, I was delighted to see a beautiful drawing of the Primula auricula in Lenneke's talk at the beginning.